Are you sure you think for yourself? What if I told you that much of your decisions, from what you wear to what you believe, are shaped by others without you realizing it? Are you really free? Today we will delve into the human mind with the classic The Social Animal by Elliot Aronson. Why do we help some people and ignore others? Why do we fall in love? Why do we judge? Why do we hate? The answers are in the science of human behavior. And this book can change the way you see the world and yourself. Social manipulation, invisible prejudice, love, violence, and empathy. All of this happens inside your mind. Do you want to find out how? Welcome to the universe of the social animal, where understanding others begins with understanding yourself. Imagine walking into a room where 7 other people are already seated. In front of you, there are 3 lines drawn on a board, one visibly longer, another medium, and a third much shorter. A man in a white lab coat asks which line matches in size a reference line. You clearly know the correct answer, but everyone else points to the wrong line. And now, do you stick to your certainty or agree with the group? This was the scenario of one of the most famous experiments in social psychology conducted by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. The goal, to investigate how much people yield to social pressure even when reality contradicts the group. The result? About 75% of participants conformed to the group at least once, even knowing the answer was wrong. This leads us to the first major lesson from Elliot Aronson. Humans are, fundamentally, social animals, driven by the need for acceptance. As Aronson states, people are not only influenced by others, they need that influence to survive and function. The power of conformity is so great that it can make us doubt our own senses, and that is the central point. Group pressure does not need to be explicit. Often, collective silence is enough to shape our decisions. This behavior has everyday implications. At work, we may suppress ideas for fear of being the only ones to think differently. In relationships, we may accept uncomfortable situations just to maintain harmony. In the political field, conformity explains how certain beliefs gain strength even when they are illogical or dangerous. But conformity is not always negative. It is also essential for social coexistence. Following rules, respecting norms, and cooperating with the group are forms of positive conformity. The problem arises when the fear of rejection prevents us from acting authentically. Aronson invites us to reflect. To what extent are we being true to ourselves? And when are we just following the herd? By understanding the power of conformity, we take the first step to free ourselves from it, or at least to use it consciously. Why do we change our minds? What makes a simple conversation, a video on the internet, or even a TV commercial manage to alter our deepest beliefs and attitudes? According to Elliot Aronson, the answer lies in the structure of persuasion, one of the central pillars of social psychology. Persuasion is the art and science of influencing attitudes, and as Aronson explains, this influence occurs through a triad: who is speaking, the source, what is being said, the message, and to whom it is addressed, the audience. Experiments conducted by Carl Hovland at Yale University showed that sources considered credible, experts and figures with authority, have greater persuasive power. But interestingly, attractiveness also matters. Charismatic, likable, or trustworthy-looking people tend to be more persuasive, even if they are not experts. Aronson emphasizes, a rational message can convince, but it is emotion that makes people act. This brings us to the importance of emotional appeal. Messages that evoke fear, empathy, humor, or outrage are more likely to impact the audience. However, there is a balance point. If fear is excessive and does not offer a clear solution, it can generate rejection. The way the message is presented also matters. Repetition increases familiarity, which leads to greater acceptance. This phenomenon is known as the mere exposure effect. Additionally, when people are distracted or tired, they are more susceptible to superficial arguments, which explains the effectiveness of short, repetitive advertisements. But the process does not end with receiving the message. Attitude change depends on the receiver's motivation to think about the subject. According to the elaboration likelihood model, there are two routes to persuasion. The central route, based on logical and critical analysis, and the peripheral route, based on superficial cues like appearance, slogans, and emotions. In the context of personal development, this invites us to reflect on how we absorb information daily. Are we being convinced by reason or by mental shortcuts? Are we thinking critically or just reacting to immediate stimuli? The good news is that by understanding the mechanisms of persuasion, we can become less manipulable and also more effective in conveying our own messages with ethics and empathy. Aronson concludes, attitude change is more lasting when the person feels they arrived at the conclusion on their own. True persuasion does not impose, it invites reflection. And this is a powerful tool for those seeking growth, authenticity, and impact in the world. Have you ever found yourself justifying a wrong choice just to avoid admitting you were wrong? Or perhaps you persisted in a clearly flawed decision because changing your mind seemed even worse. This is the territory of cognitive dissonance, one of the most fascinating concepts in social psychology, developed by Leon Festinger and extensively explored by Elliot Aronson. Cognitive dissonance occurs when we have two conflicting ideas in our mind, or when our behavior contradicts our beliefs. This creates psychological discomfort that we generally try to alleviate in some way, usually by adjusting our beliefs to align with our behavior. A classic experiment well illustrates this phenomenon. Festinger and Carl Smith asked participants to perform an extremely boring task and then lie to another person, saying it was fun. Some were paid $20, others only $1. Interestingly, those who received only $1 ended up rating the task as more interesting. Why? Because they lacked a strong external justification, like money, for lying. To reduce the dissonance between I lied and I am an honest person, they reevaluated the experience as positive. Those who received $20 had a clear external justification, the payment, and therefore didn't need to change their perception. Aronson emphasizes that dissonance is more intense when it relates to self-image. When our actions conflict with how we see ourselves, such as honest, ethical, competent, there is an urgent need to rebalance that conflict. He writes, the motivation to reduce dissonance is stronger when what is at stake is the integrity of the self. In everyday life, this mechanism explains why so many people stay in toxic relationships, defend bad decisions, or rationalize inconsistent behaviors. It is easier to adapt the belief than to face the pain of admitting a mistake. But not everything is negative. Cognitive dissonance can also be a powerful force for growth. When we recognize this discomfort and face it honestly, we have the opportunity to revise beliefs, change behaviors, and evolve. For those seeking personal development, this means embracing discomfort as a sign of necessary change. It means asking difficult questions. Am I acting according to my values? Am I betraying myself to avoid conflicts? Am I justifying the unjustifiable? Aronson teaches us that being human is inevitably living with some dissonance. The difference lies in how we deal with it, with denial or with courage. And the courage to change begins with the recognition that we are not always right, but we can always improve. We all carry preconceived ideas about others, often without realizing it. These are stereotypes, generalizations applied to entire groups of people based on race, gender, class, religion, sexual orientation, or any other prominent characteristic. Elliot Aronson reminds us that stereotypes are not necessarily malicious. They are, in part, a mental strategy of cognitive economy, a way for the brain to process and organize information quickly. The problem arises when these stereotypes become rigid, inaccurate, and serve as the basis for prejudices and discrimination. Prejudice, in turn, is a negative attitude directed at someone solely because they belong to a certain group. Discrimination is the action, the behavior resulting from that attitude. Aronson states, stereotypes persist because they provide cognitive justifications for our feelings and behaviors toward others. One of the most revealing experiments in this field was conducted by Henri Tajfel with the so-called minimal group. Simply dividing people randomly into two groups was enough for them to start favoring members of their own group, even without any logical reason for it. This shows how much humans tend to value the us at the expense of the them. This tendency has evolutionary roots, but its social consequences are profound: wars, segregation, structural inequalities, and on an individual level, stereotypes shape expectations, sabotage opportunities, and hurt self-esteem. Another experiment cited by Aronson is the stereotype threat. When women are reminded that they are in a typically male situation, such as a math test, they tend to perform worse, not due to lack of ability, but because the stress of representing their group and the fear of confirming a negative stereotype affect their performance. This reveals how prejudices not only affect social relations, they directly impact the psyche, emotions, and concrete outcomes for each individual. But there is hope. Research shows that direct and meaningful contact between groups can reduce prejudice, especially when this contact occurs under conditions of equality, with common goals and institutional support. Educating for empathy, promoting representation, and questioning internalized beliefs are essential steps. For those seeking personal development, this involves honestly examining their own biases, asking oneself, what mental images automatically come to mind when I think of certain groups? Are these images based on real experience or inherited narratives? True human growth begins when we stop reacting automatically and start responding consciously. Aronson concludes this topic with a powerful reflection. People do not hate what they understand. Knowledge, empathy, and coexistence are the most effective antidotes against the poisons of prejudice, and each of us has a role in this process. Aggressiveness is one of the most primitive and complex forces of human behavior. Present in all cultures, it can manifest in subtle forms, such as a harsh word or social exclusion, or in explosions of physical violence. But what drives someone to act aggressively? Elliot Aronson explores this question comprehensively, gathering various theories and empirical evidence. One of the classic approaches is the frustration-aggression theory, which suggests that aggression arises when a person is prevented from achieving a goal. Frustration builds up tension, and aggression emerges as a release valve. However, this theory does not explain all aggressive behaviors. After all, not every frustration leads to violence. Another relevant explanation is social learning. Through observation and imitation, we learn from an early age that certain aggressive behaviors can be rewarded. Children who see adults resolving conflicts with shouting or physical aggression tend to repeat these patterns. Television, games, and movies also influence, especially when violence is glamorized or has no consequences. A famous study cited by Aronson is the Bobo doll experiment by Albert Bandura. In it, children who watched adults assault an inflatable doll, the Bobo, reproduced the aggressive behavior with greater intensity, especially when they saw that the adult was not punished. Additionally, there are biological and environmental factors that influence the propensity for aggression. Hormones like testosterone, alcohol consumption, extreme heat, urban disorganization, among others. Mas Aronson also emphasizes that aggression can be controlled and redirected. Emotional self-control, empathy, reinforcement of peaceful behaviors, and restorative justice are effective tools for reducing violence. He writes, aggressiveness is not inevitable. It is to a large extent learned, and therefore can be unlearned. In personal development, this leads us to a powerful reflection. How do we deal with anger? Do we react automatically, or can we channel this impulse constructively? Do we recognize the triggers that lead us to hostility? Recognizing aggression in ourselves is not a sign of weakness. It is an essential step towards self-awareness and transformation. Aronson invites us to understand that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the conscious choice not to turn that conflict into destruction. And this choice begins within each of us. In a world marked by conflicts and individualism, acts of generosity and compassion remind us that we are also capable of caring for, helping, and protecting one another. But why do we help? What motivates us to act in someone else's benefit, even when it involves personal sacrifice? Elliot Aronson dedicates a profound chapter to altruism, the intentional behavior of helping another person without expectation of reward. Social psychology has been investigating this phenomenon for decades, revealing that human generosity is complex and multifaceted. One of the first questions debated is whether genuine altruism truly exists, or if all help provides some indirect benefit to the donor, such as guilt relief, prestige gain, or future reciprocity. Regardless of the motivation, pro-social behaviors are essential for the cohesion and survival of human groups, and they are learned from an early age through modeling, reinforcement, and culture. Aronson highlights the so-called bystander effect, one of the most impactful findings in social psychology. In emergency situations, the greater the number of witnesses, the less likely it is that someone will intervene. This occurs due to diffusion of responsibility. Each individual assumes that someone else will take the initiative. The case of Kitty Genovese, a young woman murdered in New York in 1964 in front of dozens of passive witnesses, was the catalyst for many studies on this social apathy. Subsequent experiments, such as those by Darley and Latane, showed that the likelihood of helping increases when we are alone, when we perceive the victim as similar to us, or when we are emotionally touched by the situation. Furthermore, people with higher levels of empathy and a sense of social responsibility tend to act more. Humor also influences. Being in a good mood increases the willingness to help. Aronson writes, "Empathy is perhaps the most powerful motivator of altruistic behavior. When we feel another's pain as if it were our own, acting becomes almost inevitable. On the path of personal development, this challenges us to move beyond indifference, to pay attention to the needs around us, to cultivate empathy as a daily practice, and not just as words. Being altruistic is not about self-nullification. It is about expanding the circle of care beyond the ego. And in doing so, we strengthen the social fabric and, paradoxically, ourselves as well. Helping does not make us weak. It makes us human. Few topics inspire as much interest as love, and few are as fundamental to our human experience. In the chapter dedicated to relationships, Elliot Aronson guides us through a scientific and deeply human analysis of the forces that bring us together, keep us united, and sometimes drive us apart. The first element analyzed is interpersonal attraction. Why do we feel attracted to certain people and not others? The answer involves multiple factors: proximity, familiarity, similarity, reciprocity, and physical appearance. Aronson emphasizes that physical proximity significantly increases the chances of connection. This is the so-called exposure effect, which has been studied in contexts such as schools, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Being close increases familiarity, and familiarity breeds affection. Similarity also plays a central role. We prefer people who share our values, interests, lifestyles, and even similar linguistic patterns. This gives us a sense of validation and belonging. And of course, reciprocity is essential. Knowing that someone likes us automatically triggers positive feelings toward that person. As Aronson states, few things increase attraction as much as knowing we are admired. Physical appearance, although often underestimated in discourse, has a strong impact on first impressions. Studies show that people considered physically attractive are seen as smarter, kinder, and more competent, a bias called the halo effect. This does not mean that love is superficial, but rather that initial judgment can be influenced by visual factors. Aronson also distinguishes between two types of love: romantic love, intense, passionate, emotionally unstable, and companionate love, deep, stable, based on intimacy and commitment. Both are important in building bonds, but it is the companionate love that sustains long-term relationships. An interesting point raised by Aronson is the role of vulnerability. Showing imperfections and fragilities, the so-called pratfall effect, can increase attraction as it humanizes and brings people closer. People who seem too perfect tend to be less likable. In the journey of personal development, understanding relationship psychology allows us to act with greater awareness. Instead of idealizing or reacting automatically, we can cultivate healthier connections based on empathy, honesty, and mutual respect. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice, a construction, a dialogue. And like any human process, it can be studied, understood, and improved. Being better is also a way to grow. Who are we? This seemingly simple question reveals one of the greatest complexities of the human condition. In the chapter on identity and self-concept, Elliot Aronson shows how our self is not an isolated entity, but is shaped, fed, and often limited by the gaze of others. Self-concept is the image we have of ourselves, our characteristics, values, talents, flaws, and personal narratives. But, as Aronson emphasizes, this image is deeply influenced by the social environment. The interactions we have, the comparisons we make, and the messages we receive constantly feed into the construction of who we believe ourselves to be. A key concept in this process is self-perception. We often learn about ourselves by observing our own behaviors, especially when our emotions or intentions are unclear. For example, if I see myself helping others frequently, I might conclude that I am a generous person. Another central point is the social normative influence, the tendency we have to adjust our behaviors and opinions to conform to the group. This does not occur only due to explicit pressure, but also out of fear of rejection or desire for acceptance. Aronson also addresses the phenomenon of the threat to self-image. When we receive criticism or negative feedback, we often respond defensively or rationalize. After all, protecting identity is a mechanism of self-preservation, but there is also room for growth. He shows that self-concept is flexible and can transform with new experiences, reflections, and changes in environment. The key lies in awareness, recognizing when we are acting out of authenticity and when we are merely playing roles to please others. In the age of social media, this reflection gains even more strength. We constantly compare our behind the scenes with the highlights of others' lives. We create idealized avatars of ourselves, and often we confuse external validation with personal worth. Aronson invites us to recover the essential self, the one that remains intact even outside social stages. He writes, "We are shaped by those around us even when we think we are being unique." In personal development, this awareness is liberating. It allows us to make choices more aligned with our true values. It helps us distinguish the inner voice from external expectations, and it encourages us to live with more authenticity. Being yourself in a world that constantly pushes you to be something else is an act of courage, and also of deep self-knowledge. Throughout The Social Animal, Elliot Aronson takes us on a revealing journey about human behavior. More than just providing data and theories, he shows us how social psychology is a powerful lens for understanding not only others, but most importantly, ourselves. We live surrounded by influences, some subtle, others explicit. Groups, norms, expectations, memories, affections, fears, beliefs. Understanding how these forces operate is the first step to stop being mere automatic reactors and become conscious agents of our choices. Conformity, persuasion, cognitive dissonance, prejudice, altruism, aggressiveness, love, identity. Each of these themes offers us a piece of the puzzle that is the human being in society, and Aronson's main message is clear. We are social by nature, but we are not doomed to repeat patterns. We can learn, change, grow. He writes, "The goal of social psychology is not to judge human behaviors, but to understand them, and from that understanding, to find healthier ways of coexistence." For those seeking personal development, this work is an invitation to self-awareness. It challenges us to question habits, review beliefs, and cultivate empathy, to perceive how our attitudes affect others, and how we can build more authentic, fair, and meaningful relationships. It also reminds us that self-knowledge is not an end in itself, but a means to live with more purpose and less illusion, to make choices less driven by external approval and more aligned with our true values. We conclude this video with an invitation. Carry with you what you have learned, observe your reactions, listen with more presence, reflect before judging, question before agreeing, and remember, each small change in your way of acting can generate a transformative effect on the collective. May knowledge about human behavior not remain just theory, but inspire daily practices of respect, empathy, and courage. Because in the end, being a social animal is not a limitation. It's an opportunity to grow together. And as we say here, discover your IKIGAI, live with purpose, connect consciously, and transform the world, starting with yourself. Subscribe to the channel, like and share, exercise your positive influence in the world.